reason we are here is to hear directly from scientist and author Carol Ruckdeschel. Our volunteers are with her on Cumberland Island right now. Our team on island has been experiencing inclement weather all weekend, but has still managed to make sure that we have content to bring to you yesterday and today. Our determined volunteers opted to do a pre-recording earlier today, directly prior actually, before our event, and we were able to receive that transmission. So if there's any interruptions or speed delays, please be patient with us. We are also making sure that we have the right information to you for this event. We will go live after our intermission today. We ask for your patience if there are any delays. We had to pivot this afternoon, but thanks to our unshakable team, we're able to make sure that we have the content to share. We appreciate our in-person audience and our viewers that are online right now for their support as well. Okay. Carol first visited Cumberland Island in the 1960s as a research assistant with Georgia State University. She took up residence on the island in the early 1970s and has dedicated her life to its study. During her career, Ruckdeschel organized the Sea Turtle Stranding Network, which is reporting dead or injured sea turtles, that was later taken over by the National Marine Fisheries Service. She's also served as a researcher and observer for sea turtle nesting surveys, the Smithsonian Institution, U.S. National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Yesterday, we spoke at length with Carol about her writing, research, and of course, her book, A Natural History of Cumberland Island, Georgia. Today, we're going to hear more about some of the issues Cumberland Island is facing in 2022. Following a brief intermission, Carol will be then answering your questions. We're now going to turn it over to Carol and Jessica, the director of Wild Cumberland, who is with Carol right now on Cumberland.
Many of the people at home today or tuning in with us from across the country didn't have necessarily an opportunity to attend our discussion yesterday centered around your book. And I thought it might be great to give people a little bit of an idea about how you arrived at this location or what your first experience was like on Cumberland Island.
I first came here with a professor of mine, and she studied lizard malaria, and she liked to take students with her to help catch lizards. And I was thrilled, of course, to come to a barrier island for the first time. It was really quite an event for me. And we camped in a house that was being renovated, and it was pretty special. This was in the late 60s, 1960s. And she came back several times. She had research on other islands and in the swamp too. But that was how I got here.
Well, you went on after that to work, of course, for the Georgia Natural Areas Council when Jimmy Carter was doing that, and you got to see some of the most amazing parts of our state. I hope we get an opportunity to view maybe some of your notes and experiences from that time. But today we're here to talk a little bit about this place where we are. And for the people at home who've maybe never had an opportunity to visit, could you help transport them to where we are today?
Barrier islands are really special, and they don't occur everywhere, but they're certainly from mid-Florida up through South Carolina and on a little ways. And what they do is they protect the island themselves. Of course, any storm coming and big waves and rough surf, all that, just batters against the sand dunes. But the island is called a barrier island because it actually forms a barrier to the rough sea to protect the mainland and the salt marshes. And so it's a very resilient ecosystem, tough, dynamic. I mean, big dunes bigger than a house can be washed away one day and be back the next week. It's really exciting, and I was terribly excited to see it and be able to begin to learn about it.
So can you describe for me the beaches and the dunes and the what you experience when you get here?
Yeah, well, it's separated from the mainland by brackish water rivers. There are freshwater rivers coming in at each end of the barriers, which delineate them from each other. And so you've along with the tidal rivers, you've got vast salt marshes, which Georgia is known for its salt marshes, and they are nurseries for many marine critters. And so it's a very rich environment. Anyway, then when you come inland, there are various habitats. There's a scrub, and then there's the maritime forest, there's freshwater wetlands, the beach dunes, and all of which is just very exciting. I mean, everybody is moved by it.
After you took up residence here, though, Carol, it wasn't only the beauty of this island that got your attention.
No. In fact, before I even moved here, I was lured and hooked by a dead sea turtle. I saw a turtle on the beach, and I got so excited. It was dead. I've always loved turtles, and I didn't want to leave it. I wanted to examine it and spend time with it and learn what's going on. And everybody said, "Oh, there are a lot. You'll see a lot more. You'll see a lot more." And I thought, "What do you mean I'll see a lot more? I mean, in Atlanta. I lived in Atlanta. I came from Atlanta, and I couldn't imagine what they were talking about, but it was true. And it's a fact that everybody on the coast knew that there were a lot of dead sea turtles. But I'd never heard it in Atlanta. I'd never heard a thing about it, never read anything about it. So that was, a question is always a challenge. And so that started me on a long adventure.
Yeah, so you actually began collecting these data, and it was the foundation, really, of the sea stranding network that is still currently managed by the National Marine Fisheries Service, if that's accurate.
That's correct. I mean, the first question is, what's the magnitude of this? I mean, everybody knew about it but me. And so I started contacting people on other islands, regardless of political boundaries, in Florida too. Just, is this a localized thing? Am I experiencing something specific to this place? Well, it turned out no, of course. And what it ultimately went back to was shrimping effort. And that was pretty, it was unfortunate that that's it, but that is it. I mean, turtles have to breathe air, so they can't, if they get caught in a net and held forced submergence, they just don't make it, or most of them don't. Anyway, so that started that, and that meant we really definitely needed to monitor this and get a handle on the magnitude.
Well, and there was a threat of a lawsuit against the state of Georgia for failing to protect those sea turtles from feral animals on the island. So there was actually negotiation with the Attorney General's office and I believe the head of DNR. There was a blue ribbon panel that was created, and that state and federal panel devised what is known as the Comprehensive Sea Turtle Management Plan for the state of Georgia, and is still in effect at this time. So we're incredibly grateful that you were here at that time and observing and paying attention, and not just paying attention, but that you were driven enough to ensure that you found answers and that people who could make a difference were listening. So it's hard to think about what could have happened to multiple species of sea turtles if you really hadn't been paying close attention during that time.
Yeah, several species come.
Yeah, but let's talk a little bit about things that you've witnessed in the 50 years you've been here that have affected the ecology of Cumberland Island. Because no doubt being able to live in it and witness it firsthand, you probably have some significant items that you've witnessed over the years.
That's true. The first and the worst and first I encountered impact to sea turtles was feral animals. And when I first came here, I don't think a turtle nest, a clutch, survived the hogs. I mean, every square yard of the island was plowed up. It was quite amazing. And it was, of course, very discouraging because here you see the adults and larger juveniles being killed. I mean, one year we had 200 dead ones here. That's a pretty significant number. And then you see all the eggs being eaten, and it's you just feel compelled. You got to do something then, and so that started it. But the worst negative impact on the resource came from feral animals, both cattle initially. There were free-roaming cattle.
We talked about that a little yesterday. So
Really?
for the folks who weren't able to join us yesterday, can you just give us a brief overview of the cattle and the damage that they did while they were roaming free?
Yeah, there were free-roaming cattle on the island, belonged mostly to the south end, to the Carnegies, Miss Ferguson especially. And at the time, I didn't know much about cattle, but they are really devastating on an ecosystem. And it turned out that they even demolished the dunes because by demolishing the vegetation that holds the dunes in place. And so that had the most significant long-term effect. They did, the cattle did. But then when the Park Service came, they did require them to remove the cattle, and that was a great thing to do. And I mean, I didn't realize how great it was at the time, and we're still seeing the effects from cattle. I mean, it's just now getting to the place. Maybe it'll stop being quite so obvious.
Right.
So that was great. And then there were also horses here. The Carnegies brought a train car load of 20 Mustangs from Arizona over in, 1920, I think, and just released them because they loved horses. And I think the horses were in Arizona were about to die, and they were offering them for free if anybody wanted them. I mean, that was my understanding, but I've been to the archives and found the railroad bills and everything. I mean, it's fact, that's what happened. And then they barged them over and released them. So that was the basis for the herd here, the horse herd.
But the Park Service hasn't rounded up those animals and removed them.
No, and it's curious why they haven't, but they have not. And they do damage to the dunes.
It's been well documented, the damage that
Yes.
the feral horses do specifically to these ecosystems.
What people don't realize is the island would look very different without the horses. And I say that with great confidence because what horses eat is all the Spanish moss they can reach. And I've been in areas, and in fact, one time I was in an area exploring a place where there was supposed to be an old road, and all of a sudden I said to the people with me, something's funny here, something's wrong, what in the heck? And I'm start looking around and I don't know what's bothering me. And finally I think, horse poop, is there any horse poop? There's no sign of horse poop. And the Spanish moss is growing to the ground like big curtains.
Wow.
And I get the chills.
Yeah, you
I
really
get
did.
really excited just remembering that because it was such a revelation to me. It got too tight. It had grown up too much for the horses to get in there anymore safely, because they're not woodland animals. Of course, they have trouble. They can get caught in a vine or a briar and die. So that was really nice to see that.
Well, I mean, and it has been well documented. There's been research done over and over about the damage they do for native plants, for the dunes, for our freshwater systems, which are especially important for migratory birds and other animals.
And water quality.
Yeah. You can't really walk along the beach without running into a pile of poop.
Ooh. I mean, some of them 2 feet deep, right?
But there were other things that have affected surely the ecosystems here, potentially also the wilderness designation itself and its boundary redraw. I would think.
Well, that's true. I mean, the MPS introduced bobcats in the late 80s, and there were no pre-release studies done, so we couldn't measure the impact they had. There weren't bobcats on our other barrier islands at the time, which to me should have been a big red flag, but they did it. And there's still, some bobcats are still here, but I don't know if you want to hear that whole story.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Well, they've done. There are people studying them that let them go after they, of course they released them, and they've studied them, and they've come in annually and done samples of fecal material to see what they're eating and try to get some idea of the numbers remaining. Well, the numbers go down, and because the island's isolated, they become genetically inbred. I mean, what are they going to do? They can swim to the mainland. When they released them, one swam to the mainland, and they tracked it for a while. So we know that's possible, and if it's possible one way, it's possible back over here, but there aren't that many on the mainland anymore because it's more and more developed every year. One just swam as far as you could see straight out to sea. So clearly there were too many. They let 38 go, 38 bobcats. I imagine that's probably the highest density of anywhere in the world, bobcats. Nevertheless, they made it, and they're still here, but they are now genetically restrained. So they're thinking that they probably won't make it, they'll die out. Well, bonanza, that's a great experiment. That's all it was.
But this isn't a laboratory.
Well, I know, and that's why I think it was not a good thing, especially since you could never measure their impact, and yet we knew anybody looking that was here knew they had a tremendous impact on the native fauna. And I mean, the rabbits, there used to be rabbits everywhere you went,
I've never seen a rabbit on this island in the 20-something years I've been
Well,
here.
I just trumped all the freshwater ponds and everything looking for sign, and it just went down, boom, crash, because they're easy to catch. The big problem was a cruising predator, which a bobcat is. I mean, it's going actively seeking, stealthily sneaking. And so none of the animals on the island were used to that. I mean, it's just like, well, I don't have to give an analogy.
Well, it
that's
disrupted
clear.
the entire system.
Right, and that was just so bad. Turkeys, you'd find piles of feathers everywhere. I mean, they were just, all the animals were naive. And so, and that's just what we could see easily. So there were a lot of other animals, the mice, everything, squirrels, anything. They were not ready for a cruising predator. So it really was a big disruption. But now that they understand the problem, that they get genetic, which the information was available before, we just maybe didn't know the size of the place or whatever, or thought they would cross back and forth. I don't know what they were thinking. But it lasted for now we've got the time it took to get to that
to get to that
bottleneck. And presumably they won't do it again, because then it is just treating it as a laboratory, and it's not fair to the native fauna.
Well, and wilderness is specifically
That's
sort of another issue.
That's a little problem. I mean, I have a problem with that, but it's not usually taken into consideration much over here.
Well, it's not just, you know, the bobcat and other species that we've mentioned here that have been introduced. You mentioned that the possum may have been sort of an accidental.
No,
Well, okay.
it was
Tell us
deliberate.
that story.
It was deliberate. I mean, there are no possums here, and that was great. I mean, that's the thing. When I came, the first thing I wanted to do, I got to know what's here. Who are what my contemporaries here?
Yeah, your neighbors.
What's cooking? And so I really did want to know. And when there were no possums, that was kind of exciting, because possums are everywhere, right? And then one day, it was in the 90s, there was a possum, and I went, what? And somebody told me, you know, who let them go, let a couple go, or one, it had to be a couple or else a pregnant female or something. Why? And they said, because they weren't here. There weren't any here. Oh, man. This was not the Park Service. This
Sure.
was somebody from the mainland. And so we've got possums here now. And it's not just the animal. They brought all their parasites. And, I mean, it's such a shame to disrupt what was here before it was studied in detail. That's the way I look at it. Without possums, but they're here now, and we'll see. Maybe too hot a summer, too cold a winter. Maybe we'll find out why they weren't here before.
There's also been, over the years, in addition to the animals and species we just discussed, a number of different types of vegetation introduced to the island and its wilderness.
Yeah, it's been not deliberately introduced, of course, except for the landscaping around private homes, and the worst part is on heavy equipment, which comes in and either grades the road or does something, and it's not clean, and that's classic. I mean, everybody knows that's the way a lot of introduced species get to where they are, through equipment. But there's a place where island people can take organic refuse, like yard trimmings, and dump them. And that's just a greenhouse of exotic plants. Yeah. I mean, it is. You can find so many interesting exotics there. It's really bad, but the park goes there to get fill, and because it's on a spoil island, and they go there and get fill and then dump it on the roads and everything. And of course, they're dumping all these exotic plant seeds and probably plants themselves. So that's how a lot of it got distributed.
And it's increasingly important as we work to preserve all of our native environments.
Right. And some of the seeds from domestic plants that are very invasive are transported by birds and things. And I mean, I've found them growing the tallow tree out in the middle of nowhere, that not around any roads or anything. So it's important. I don't know if the Park Service has the means by which they can tell people what not to plant or outlaw certain species. I don't know that. But they came from private lands.
Mm. Well, you know, these non-native and some otherwise introductions are just some of the things that have impacted the quality of the natural resources on the island over the years. But I think that there's an even bigger, probably, concern for yourself about the maritime forest. And Cumberland Island does support one of the largest maritime forests on our coast. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your concerns for the maritime forest?
Yeah, it's sad. I'd rather not even tell you, but it really is a shame, but it's something that everybody needs to be aware of. And that's at the potentially the most devastating insult to the communities right now is our the fire management plan for the island. And I say that pretty much without reservation, and I don't want to say it. I want to be able to support it, believe me. But it threatens communities like the maritime forest, because the uplands were, over half of the island was in agriculture in the past, and it was mostly the uplands, and not the newer portions or wherever it's got newly growing maritime forest. But once you make a field out of something for Sea Island cotton, everybody's familiar with that, so you can understand it. What's the first pioneer species that comes in an old field? Everybody knows it, pines. And so if you ride down the main road now and look at the maritime forest on either side, there are, in some cases, no pines, and some cases a few scattered, and in some places quite a few. And it's probably because of the length of time since it was a field. It was allowed to go fallow. But that's not the way whoever wrote the management plan looked at it. They're trying to encourage pines, whereas one prominent ecologist in Florida said that any pines on the barrier islands are a sign of disturbance. I mean, it's known they're not a component of the maritime forest, but they're there because it was a field and it's recovering. Well, if you burn anything, it doesn't burn well. Mature maritime forest resists fire, which is good. But if you keep introducing it, deliberately introducing it, what you're doing is you're killing the oaks that are coming, tiny little oaks, in favor of pines. So you can, without a predetermined idea even, turn it into a pine forest.
It sounds like we're sort of inadvertently or not, but sort of trying to restore to a period of time versus letting natural processes take their own course.
Exactly.
And that seems like the antithesis of wilderness.
Well, it is. And of course, special interests took the north end out of wilderness, but the rest of the island is, and they plan to burn that too. Like every 2 years, you burn a different plot, and they're going to introduce all this fire, which is not a friend of the maritime forest.
How many acres of wilderness are they planning to burn?
It's over 2,000. And I tried to find out who authorized it. The regional wilderness coordinator said he didn't have the authority to authorize it. I tried to go to the Park Service Wilderness Leadership Council, and they didn't want to talk about it. And of course, on the fire management plan is a superintendent's name. Well, we know the superintendent, that he's a management guy. He doesn't understand ecology, but we've never had an ecologist on the staff here. So it's very confusing, really, to try to track it down, which I have tried to track it down, try to be able to tell the people why. They say it's necessary to restore the forest, but you're going to restore it to a serial stage of the maritime forest, which is not what you want to do.
It's almost like they're picking a point in time and attempting to recreate.
Yes, it's very difficult for me to understand. I've tried to find somebody to talk to about it, to explain to me what they're thinking, but I haven't been able to. And I mean, I've tried for a couple of years.
Well, this sort of, we were interrupted yesterday at the end of our broadcast because of the weather.
Yes.
But we were starting to get into the idea about sort of a deficit-driven, a deficiency in our systems that they may not, that the agencies and the entities that make the decisions for our public lands may not always want to take in input from non-traditional sources, right? Yourself. If it doesn't come from within the agency, then the credibility is sort of in question.
Right.
It related to the resource. And so, this seems for me reminiscent of what you were saying about the sea turtles for so long. It took you years and years to get people to understand that there really was a problem. It was significant enough, it needed to be addressed. And
Right.
after it was, we saw a significant change.
Well, then it took a legal action even.
Yeah.
And that's just so discouraging, because we should have better rapport, and the policies should be more transparent about the goals and what's going on. Some of the writing is just word salad. It's trying to justify. It's just a justification for what they're doing, rather than really explaining why it's necessary. So you can't. It's difficult to argue. That's what I'm saying. And I haven't found anybody to even talk with me and try to explain it to me so I could understand it any better than I do.
Seems like the seashore is still facing a whole lot of threats, even at its 50th anniversary.
Exactly.
So let me ask you,
Persistent challenges.
you've seen, though, some acts of protection along the way. It hasn't all been hard. They did
Yes.
remove the feral cattle.
The cattle, it was wonderful.
They
Right.
took action.
Right, and there is a fellow on staff, and been on staff for many years, whose job is to keep the hogs under control. And apparently, I always use this because we can go to the moon, that's no piece of cake, but we can't seem to get rid of hogs. I mean, poisoning would be easy, but of course you shouldn't do that because you kill so many other things in so doing. So it's very difficult because they're prolific breeders, and they do well here, contrary to horses. Horses have a serious survival problem even here, whereas hogs, they make it fine. But by having that person on staff, they've saved a lot of sea turtle eggs, and he's just done a great job.
That's great. Well, in addition to that, the wilderness designation in 1982, I think, sort of shifted the purpose of the park, right? In 72, it was created as a national seashore, and in 82, it was officially given the highest form of land protection available in the United States, which is to be designated as wilderness. So that's sort of shifted their priorities, maybe, or the function of the park to be one that prioritized then natural resources instead of being simply visitor-centric and
We would hope. Yes, that's true.
because that wilderness protection should ensure that these ecosystems that we've been discussing remain intact and protected in perpetuity.
And even introductions, it's every form of manipulation should not occur in wilderness. But that's the most difficult thing for us as humans to do, is nothing.
Well, let's talk about why wilderness is so significant, specifically on Cumberland Island. Because it serves a couple of functions, right? I mean, in addition to the significance of a barrier island wilderness, or a barrier island which protects our coastline and has a number of functions, there are several and multiple species who really depend on the wilderness here for their survival. There are migratory birds. We have one of the largest freshwater lakes on all of the Georgia barrier islands.
And the slough system hosts a lot of birds
Yeah.
when they've got water.
And there are things like the American eel that habitate
That's
in
right.
some of those slough systems.
That's right.
But it's certainly, our beach is nesting habitat for multiple, species of sea turtles. And here at 50 years, the 50-year anniversary of the seashore, it's hard to think or hard to imagine that we're still battling some of the same threats and issues.
It is, and the wilderness designation should foster the protection of naturally functioning systems. It doesn't matter where it wants to go. It should be able to go without our impediments from us. And that is going through the stages, for example, from an old field to a mature maritime forest, and not be stopped along mid development.
Process.
Yeah, and altered. But I don't know, and I like I say, I've been unable to find out where that initiated. So I can't give much insight.
Well, how about, things like, we've all heard across national media about Spaceport Camden now for a really, really long time. This is a private company who wants to launch very small experiential rockets, technically directly over federally protected wilderness. So it's sort of introducing a new commercial use of this protected area. And that's certainly not the only issue, but how do you respond to the idea of launching rockets directly over this location?
Well, I think somebody's very short-sighted but then you go back to the fact that it's difficult for people to understand doing nothing. Saying doing nothing protects things. They absolutely don't understand it, and yet that's what we've got to be able to do, and we've got to protect the right to do nothing in wilderness.
Well, the locals showed up and they turned out at the polls,
That's
and they
right.
let people know that that's not what these ecosystems and this habitat should be used for. And
Exactly.
the damage that it could do is very real, and so we're grateful for that. But I don't think it's over yet. I think that we can expect to probably see continued development out of that issue, and so we'll be watching it carefully as it pertains to not just Cumberland Island, but all federally protected wilderness areas.
And wilderness, yes, it can be a precedent setting for the wilderness, which would be such a shame, such a shame. I mean, it's just difficult to educate people on the value of wilderness. Very difficult. That's one of the most difficult things, really, the concept to get across, just because of our nature, wanting to always do something, make it better.
Well, and there are other threats to that protection. The island is still always at risk of private development.
Yeah, that's because the park didn't acquire land in the last 50 years that they should have, and of course they were hamstrung for money part of the time, but I think that could have been rectified at some point, some way. I've been told by people that we could get that money, but it may be, again, you're dealing with a population that has great political pull. Local population. And the Park Service, I'm not a politician, so I don't understand all the nuances of that, but I know it certainly works.
Well, the originating legislation for the seashore is supposed to ensure that...
Yes, that's true, preserved in its primitive state. So the Park
Service, or the Department of Interior, really, is holding these lands in trust for our well-being.
Yes, that's true.
That's really it.
Yep.
A long time ago, they decided this place was so incredibly important that it needed to be protected from ourselves.
Yep. Well, from people that lived here that might, develop it. And but in order to do that, they had to acquire the land, and the fact that there are hundreds of acres of fee simple land still here, the Park Service, I don't know how to explain it, and they're not very transparent. They're not transparent at all, and they don't even want to talk about it. So it would be difficult to learn that. You know, besides they were short on money for a while. I know that.
Well, we can hope that some of our elected officials and the officials that we're voting for out there are going to
Yes.
acknowledge this lack of funding and the shortfalls that the agency has faced in being able to manage these lands. And I think that's increasingly important as we face climate change, rising sea levels, warmer temperatures, more severe storms, for places like this and for all Park Service units across the nation right now. Unsurpassed visitor use, changing types of use. All of these things are going to become more and more significant as we move forward. And your data or data that has been collected and compiled in your book is going to be especially critical considering what we don't know still about this place and the larger ecosystems that are at hand.
Yeah. Yeah, and all the threats that we mentioned still exist. I mean, there are still feral animals, there's still development going on, there's still wilderness that needs protection.
Well, I think, I am grateful that you participated in this opportunity to share with the public that there are a lot of places in danger, Cumberland Island being one of them, but so that it hopefully helps inspire and motivate people to understand what they can do in their own community or in their own space to ensure that Cumberland Island, places like it, their local communities can remain protected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I was just fortunate enough or unfortunate to be here to witness this firsthand. And how would anybody else know? It's like finding the sea turtle on the beach. Nobody in Atlanta knew. And Cumberland is kind of an out-of-the-way place, one far corner of the state.
Yeah, it really is. You have to go way out of your way to get here.
That's right, a specific point of to make an effort to get here. So again, people don't know all these things going on, and I kind of feel like obliged again to I mean, I'm not really that much of an activist. I can't do as good like you, but I am boots on the ground, and I love it. And that's what everybody can do is I mean, I can explain it to you, but then it's up to you. You've got to carry the ball, because actually the public is what carries the weight. One person, two people, or even a group don't carry the weight of the public.
And if you needed to give people advice based on your experience, how would you guide them to help ensure that our natural resources remain protected?
Yeah, keep a close eye. Become very familiar with a place, and you'll see when you start seeing something that you question, don't question your questioning. Just say, okay, there's something wrong here. I've got to look into this. And if you can ask and get an answer and that satisfies you, that's good. But if you can't even get an answer, or the answer you get doesn't satisfy you, then you got to just keep pushing. And that's kind of hard to do if you're don't want to integrate with people too much. Like me.
Well, there are thousands and thousands of visitors every year who are grateful that you had the tenacity and persistence to continue asking those questions of the people who could make an impact or a difference. And for the thousands and thousands of other people who haven't yet been here, you've helped to preserve it so that when they can, they will have the opportunity to experience one of America's, I think, most incredible places. So,
well, you got to trust your judgment is what you got to do, and not be afraid to speak up. And like I say, it's not my general nature to do that kind of thing, but you just got to. You got to be persistent, because that's what counts, and your judgment will be right.
Thanks, Carol.
You're welcome.
If you've ever had the opportunity to visit Cumberland Island, you know just how special it is. There are a number of conservation groups who advocate for Georgia's coast, and for good reason. It requires all of us working together to keep it protected. What makes Wild Cumberland different is that we advocate specifically to protect the wilderness. As one of the largest barrier island wilderness areas in the country, it includes saltwater marshes, old-growth maritime forests, and towering sand dunes. Less than 5% of the entire United States is protected by this federal designation. Wild places are critical to our own survival. But the visitor experience on Cumberland Island's south end would be nothing like it is today if it weren't for the wilderness protections established almost 40 years ago. Even now, Cumberland Island faces threats, including private development, overhead rockets, feral animals, and more. Wild Cumberland feels a responsibility to ensure the wilderness remains protected for the next generation. What we hope you'll take away from this series is that there are many of us from many different places working together for the same purpose. And there are ways you can contribute, no matter where you are. We hope you'll find value in this series of stories, music, and education. But most importantly, we hope you'll join us to help keep Cumberland wild.
Wild Cumberland runs on volunteer support. There's not a prerequisite here, just people who support a mission: protect the wilderness. Every volunteer has a different background, but passion is what pushes us forward. No matter what your skill set is, you can absolutely find a place to help at Wild Cumberland. All time is appreciated and all support is helpful. If you want to join us in making a difference, volunteer. If you want to help our volunteers make an impact, donate. No matter your level of support, everyone makes a difference. Wild Cumberland makes a difference. We're here to protect the wilderness, and we have a place for you. Switching over to our live portion with Carol and Jessica on the island answering your questions. We've submitted all of your questions from our webinar yesterday, today, and our emails that came through, and we're going to be going to them live now. As a reminder, we may experience a little bit of glitchiness in the video, so please be patient with us, and we greatly appreciate your support.
We are here on Cumberland Island, and I want to thank everybody for submitting so many thoughtful questions. And we have a lot to go through so that Carol can answer them while she's available. So let's go ahead and get started. Some of these are similar in nature, so I apologize if I don't get to all of them. We will make sure we get answers to you, and I'll try to lump similar categories or topics together so that we can make our way through these. And we've received them from places outside of Georgia. We have folks tuned in from across the country right now to listen to your answers. So let's talk a little bit, kind of hinging on our earlier conversation about maybe any other ecosystem that has intrigued you as much as Cumberland Island.
Well, I'm a little partial to cypress swamps, but after that, Cumberland is about the best there is.
I couldn't agree more. All right, we have another question that is from a parent who would like to know your advice for cultivating a love of nature and all living things with our next generation. She is the mom of a wild 2-year-old mud and bug lover, and she's looking forward to exploring the Golden Isles with him.
That sounds great. All I can say is just encourage him.
Practice natural history,
That's
right?
the biggest thing. Ask him questions about what color is it, how many legs has it got, whatever it takes to focus him on it and let him look more closely at it.
That's great. All right, somebody would like to know if you ever find shark teeth on the island. This comes from some folks who are familiar with the dredge spoils on the mainland and finding fossils, but they rarely find fossilized shark teeth on the Atlantic side of the island. They typically find them near Dungeness on the marsh side. So they saw your mako shark and want to know, what you find or if you find those frequently.
I know people find them on the south end of Amelia Island on the beach, but to my knowledge, I have not, except in the spoil area. And the reason they're on the west side is they've dredged that river and
All right. Come on up.
Of course, now I can't hear your question.
I'll talk real loud. Okay, so mostly because of the dredging.
Because that's why they're there, because the riverbed was dredged to deepen the channel. And but on Amelia, I don't know. And I was fascinated too when people told me they found them over there.
That's exciting.
I mean, in the dunes you might find them where the mako shark was. If it was drug up and left in the dunes, you might find it. But that's all that I know of.
All right. Well, let's see here. What are one or two pressing issues in environmental work, barrier islands or elsewhere, that you would like to see at the forefront of ongoing research?
Well, since my main interest is here, there certainly is a lot to do, but understanding the successional stages of the various communities would be one that it has great management implications, and that should be done.
Okay. All right. What is the greatest or most impactful contribution an individual can make to save Mother Nature? Question, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think
to save it, just be vocal and pay attention. And if you see an issue, don't be afraid to call attention to it, because you're probably right. Most people don't like to call attention to things, and but it's really up to all of us, the public, to keep the managers focused.
All right. What do you think Cumberland Island will be like in another 50 years?
That's up for grabs. Right now, I really couldn't say. I can say what my hopes are. I would hope that the communities would continue to recover and be natural communities,
All right.
mature natural communities.
Somebody would like to know if the National Park Service consults with you regularly on ecological or resource issues.
Not anymore. They pretty much do everything in-house.
All right, another Park Service related question, which is why doesn't the Park Service carry your natural history book in its gift shop?
That's a question I've asked them many times, but I've never been able to get an answer, so I apologize. I wish I could, because people do ask it frequently.
Are you still practicing research? And if so,
Okay, can you guys talk a little bit?
sure. Is it working for you now? Great. All right. Thanks for your patience. It is a labor of love to try and be here with Carol so that she can answer your
questions, and we appreciate your understanding. So I'm not sure quite where we left off, but we were speaking directly about the horses and speaking about that population.
In that vein, we've had a couple questions about the horses. So specifically, someone asked if they should be removed. If so, how? And what is best for both the ecology and the horses?
It's true, both need consideration. And removing them is by far the best. This is a terrible habitat. They're not woodland animals, and they get caught in vines, and it's a bad scene. So the best thing that I've been able to come up with personally is vasectomies. That would enable them to live out their lives on the island and just slowly, I mean, without any further reproduction, and then they would be gone. So it wouldn't, it's brutal to round up wild horses and try to transport them. I've seen that done. Nobody wants to kill them. We all love them. It's just, so that seems like the best way, but we welcome any other suggestions.
Well, and I think they've experimented with other types of fertility control in the past that were unsuccessful, but
Right.
it does seem that that would have the least impact on the herd and even allowed the visitors to continue, to continue.
Well, the thing is that they tried to do the females before and give them birth control, but then every 2 years you got to go back and do them all, and that's just not feasible here. You're always going to have reproduction, and
Okay.
and the poor things.
Well, I mean, you've certainly been living here and witnessed it more than many of us.
Most people don't get to see the gory part of it. It's not a pretty sight, and it's sad. Females are pregnant from the day they first come in estrus almost, and to the rest every time. Then they end up feeding the one inside of them, the one nursing, the yearling, and themselves, and so females have a very hard time here.
All right. Well, okay. Let's switch gears a little bit. Somebody here would like to know. Wait. Let's see. What years the cattle were present on the island and who allowed that? So we talked about that a little bit in our prior session and earlier, but let's revisit that in case she wasn't. Yeah.
About the fact they were here. Yes. Well, they were here before the Park Service, so. There wasn't any allowing needed. It was just the Carnegies had them, and when the park came, well, yeah, it was 20 years almost, and then they Park Service made them, people that owned them round them up, and that was the best thing that could have ever happened for the island at the time.
All right. We've also got folks who are curious about your thoughts and observations regarding coyotes on the island. We know they are a relatively recent arrival, and some people consider them invasive, while others see them as naturalized. What are your thoughts on their place in the ecology here?
Well, I can't really say because I haven't been able to observe them that much. They're trapped and eliminated here. They got here, of course, because of us. I mean, by getting rid of all the wolves. And so the coyote population just kept marching north and then southward along the coast. And so they're in every county in Georgia. I guess they've completed their migration, and they're very successful, as everybody knows. But I've read some about them, but I really can't speak to their impact. Of course, they eat things. They eat little ground nesting birds and things like that. But so do bobcats, and there were probably red wolves here. And so I can't really speak to it. That's one thing that's always frustrated me. I'd like to get to know coyotes better.
All right. Besides your beach survey we discussed, studying animals and the landscape, what else is a favorite thing for you to do on the island?
Try to explore a new place, although they're few and far between.
We spent a lot of time hiking.
Yes, I love to just take off and walk and look. Walk slowly and just look. Make
All right.
observations.
And then this crowd in particular, somebody would like to know if you are coming to Atlanta again to speak.
Atlanta scares me, but I don't know. Maybe we can have another one here, a big island fest.
Oh, wouldn't that be something? Okay, and then let's see here. Oh, somebody would like to know what you do to protect yourself from the gnats, as they can get pretty bad. Do you have a secret that
Boy.
that you should share with the rest of us?
I don't. You see me pushing my pants. We're getting bitten right now, by the way, so that's an appropriate question.
Yeah.
But the only thing I can offer a little bit of fun information is that if you ever get one and bite it right on the tip of your tongue, they're very sweet. Now, I don't know how you would catch them to get enough to make a meal, but...
With my mouth open this much, I'm going to find out for sure. Do you have any favorite bones or specimens in your collection from the years?
Gosh, I mean, some of the rarer animals are, you always appreciate more, I guess. I don't think they'd be favorite, but like dense-beak whale and things like that. Or kind of, I found a seal here and things like that.
All right. Let's see. What would you like to be remembered for most, Carol? That's kind of a deep question.
That is. I don't know. Maybe eating the most wild hogs on Cumberland Island.
Do you have any advice for young people, maybe those who haven't even graduated yet from high school?
Look carefully at things and learn and try to understand the basics of things. That's pretty difficult for me because I'm not around children that much, or kids that much, but and hope that they get encouragement. That's the main thing in their interests.
Okay. Now, I understand that I've received a little more communication from Atlanta, and I think that we lost our connection or our audio somewhere around the time we were talking about whether or not you still practice research and what kind. So I know you sort of answered that once, but I wanted to make sure nobody missed that answer. So would you like to explain that again?
Oh, well, yes, to a degree, just continue accumulating baseline information, which is so important for any decisions.
Okay. And then why is the wilderness designation so important to the island?
Well, what does wilderness do? It protects the land from us. I mean, period. That's what it's for. And it enables ecosystems and natural processes to govern rather than for us to make decisions on what we think is right and the way it should go. And that's very important here because we have so much of the island is designated wilderness.
Okay. It's really important to understand that. We've had a couple questions about species, snakes and frogs. Do you know how many of each of those species are on our island?
Gosh. Oh, God, I just make a random guess. There have got to be over a dozen frogs, snakes. I'd hate to guess and be wrong. But it's in my book. It's got lists of everything, and they can be counted pretty easily. We've got an amazing number, but the thing is there are, of course, always fewer of every group on the island than the mainland because you have different environmental conditions.
Excellent. All right. We've gotten a few questions about, let's see here, are there native orchids on the island?
Yeah, there's green fly orchid. There's the most common one that I know of. I'm not an orchid fancier, but I don't, that's, I mean, I'd have to go look. I don't, there's a little one that's, I think, an introduced one I know, or maybe several.
Okay.
And a couple of them maybe natives, but I can't say for sure without looking.
All right, well, we talked about this in depth earlier, but we have a question about fire, and the question is, knowing that fire is a part of the natural ecological process, isn't some degree of controlled burning beneficial to sustain more diversified plant communities which support greater numbers and varieties of wildlife?
Well, since most of the island is wilderness, you would have to presume, maybe this isn't answering the question absolutely directly, you'd have to presume that the amount of fire was adequate that was naturally occurring. And to add any more might be detrimental. I mean, for example, the scrub that burns catastrophically every 25 to 30 years to mineral soil, but if you went in and did fire every 2 years, that might be a low enough fire that it allowed encroachment by other species and might change the whole community. I don't know. That would just...
All right. We received several questions about the spaceport, and as most of you know from watching national media and your inboxes with our updates, that situation, despite the incredible turnout in Camden County in opposition of that project, project is still not over, and there have been murmurs about the funding being sourced in a way that does not assume liability on the county. So I can't really speak to details about that quite yet that would be helpful to the better public understanding, but I think that as the next few weeks go on, we will start to learn more about what those plans may or may not be. So please stay tuned and don't hesitate to check our website and your monthly email newsletter for updates, because we will certainly share them as we receive them and know them to be true. So, and as we all know, national media has paid a lot of attention to this story, so you may hear something very soon about that. So let's see here. Have any other scientists inhabited Cumberland Island full time besides yourself? It's a great question.
Not that I know of, and I've been looking at literature for like 40, 50 years here, and I don't know. People have come and visited and made bird surveys and things like that, and trapped mammals, but nobody that I know really lived here.
Let's see here. Jenny would like to know if the pink house behind Plum Orchard is now under NPS purview.
The pink house, I think so.
Let's see here. What are your future plans?
Future plans? Well, I don't have any drastic changes anticipated in my life, if that's what you mean, or what the question means. So I don't really know. Just keep doing what I've been doing.
All right. Let's see. We have a couple specific questions still coming in. Folks would like to hear more about the fact that you are from Rochester, New York. So maybe you can tell them a little bit about how you ended up in the South.
I can. It's a good place to be from. That's what my family always said. Now, when Atlanta opened its Kodak processing lab, my dad worked for Kodak, and so that's how I got to Atlanta.
Okay. All right, let's see here. I want to make sure that we're getting to as many questions as possible, and we're still doing okay on time. So let's see if we can fit in a few more of these. What problems do you see in the relationships between land managers, scientists, and the general public, or what could be done differently?
I'm not sure I actually understand the question. Problems, you mean about trespassing on public lands?
It sounds like they're asking how to improve relationships maybe between the managing agencies, scientists, and the public. And so we've talked a little bit about that before.
A lot of, I mean, I can't speak for other agencies, but here there isn't much transparency, certainly not much sharing. It makes it a little difficult. It would be a lot easier if you felt like you were pulling the same wagon, which would hope would be the case.
Well, it's the 50th anniversary of the seashore
Oh, I know.
this year.
Yeah.
And you have been an integral part in ensuring that it remains
I try.
in the state that it is now. And we're incredibly grateful. We've received several questions about how people can support your work and follow what you're doing. So certainly they can stay connected with our organization, and we will plug you in as in anywhere we can to help support the work that we're doing. And we certainly appreciate that everybody, we've received multiple messages. I'm going through now, and we have just a lot of folks who are commenting and really wanting to thank you for your contributions and let you know how much they appreciate all of your work and look forward to seeing what you do next. You did mention to me, I want to say, that you have some more writing to do, and that you really like to do art. So
Yeah.
I hope that in the future you will have more time to maybe do those
Yes, I
sorts
do
of
too.
things.
I just, you know how easy it is to put things off, unfortunately. But yeah, some good stories.
How do you think, if the next generation of scientists and researchers wanted to build upon your work? I think we've talked about that, but is there any other advice you would give to people who are looking to follow in your footsteps, either as a scientist or an activist or a naturalist, a writer? I mean, you've got quite the list going, ma'am.
Well, the thing is, there's so much that can be done. People have to be here. It's difficult to be here full time. I mean, that's one of the roles I've played. And even with you all, it's hard for you all to keep your finger on the pulse when there's not much information coming out. And
You've sort of been the boots on the ground here
Right.
for a long time, and
Right.
and I think that there are a lot of agencies and people who depend on that for really the kind of site-specific knowledge they need to continue to protect it.
yeah, and I don't. That's hard. That's why I say it's going to be hard here. Because maybe that's what that other question was about. How do people work with agencies about land? Like if you want to come here and do projects, you have to get it okayed by the Park Service. And if there's not an ecologist to understand what you're wanting to do or the benefit of it,
That's a good point.
it makes it very difficult. So the research that's done here ends up being very selective. And so, in other words, it's what do I want to say? It's just it is an
Well, they sort of
added-
serve as a gatekeeper, right? I
Oh, yes,
as the
absolutely.
managing agency, so anything they want to do has to be approved by that gatekeeper in order for it to be facilitated here.
Yes, and hopefully they would want things that would contribute to management decisions or help with management decisions.
All right. Well, we're picking up on a little bit of wind here, and I think that we have almost reached the end of our time. I know Anna has a couple important messages to deliver to the rest of you, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. We've been under great technical duress making this happen, and we are so glad to do it. We could not have done it without every one of you being interested, first of all, in the work that we're doing in this special place. And we're especially grateful for Atlanta Science Festival and Georgia Humanities, but most of all for Carol. So I'm going to plan to let you guys circle back and connect with Anna, and we are going to get off this windy cliff and out of the gnats. Please stay tuned, and you'll be hearing more from us soon.
And thank you.
Oh, look at the bird.
Position.